I'd like to introduce Sophie to you. Miss Sophie Andrews. I will say that she, in age, she is somewhere between Eleanor and Marianne. She is an accomplished young lady. She sings and she plays, but thanks to her sister's cold, she will not be singing for us today. She was going to break up her performance with a song, but unfortunately she hasn't got the greatest amount of voice at the moment.
My sister's fault.
We are incredibly grateful to Sophie to stand in at this late notice for us. We are a really pleasant group who are really pleased to have you here. There is going to be a few short pieces that Sophie's going to play. She will explain them to you. You have a little programme there. She will explain them to you. Sophie is the modern face of the Jane Austen world. A young girl who has come to Jane Austen through, first of all, the 2005 film. Yep. Most of us will say not much more about that. If it's brought somebody to read Jane Austen, we are very, very happy.
I now prefer the series, don't worry.
She is probably one of the most knowledgeable young people I know on Jane Austen. I was lucky enough to be asked to host the launch of a book in Waterstones. Jeanette was there as well, and when the author of the book and I were at a loss for a quote from the book, we looked to Sophie for the answer. So you can see in her short time as an Austen fan, she has come on incredibly. So we are incredibly grateful to you, as I have said. This is Sophie's first recital like this because she is doing me a huge favour. So I will tell you that because I know she has been a little nervous. And if her curls stay in, that's me. Yeah, that's it. So I will hand you over to Sophie.
Right, I hope you can all hear me. I have to excuse my voice. Right, okay. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. In an article in the Telegraph, this quote reached number 1 of the list of the 30 greatest opening lines in literature, and it's not really surprising, for it's a very clever and powerful opening line. And so to start the recital this afternoon, I thought, what better way than with perhaps, arguably, the most iconic piece of music associated with all of the Jane Austen adaptations. 25 mini-series of Pride and Prejudice really introduced Jane Austen to the masses, whilst I've heard it was before I was born, but sorry, only a year before I was born. Thanks to Andrew Davies' brilliant interpretation, a very dashing Colin Firth, and a spirited Jennifer Ely. The Pride and Prejudice is considered the favourite of her main 6 novels, and the fans are always waiting with bated breath and some trepidation when a new adaptation is to be made. Of course, we know that some adaptations of any of the novels are more successful than others, and we won't mention the 2007 version of Mansfield Park with Billie Piper, which was fun. I have found that the 2 most talked about today would still be the series, but also the 2005 film, as Hazel said, that's what brought me into Jane Austen when I was 9, with Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden. There was a lot of controversy and split opinions among the Janeites about this film, but I'm here to talk about the music, which I think is really beautiful in the film. After that really brilliantly written theme by Carl Davis, I will now play a very contrasting piece from the film, written by Dario Marianelli. It's called The Secret Life of Daydreams, and it is heard during a scene when Elizabeth has just been told by Charlotte Lucas about her engagement to Mr. Collins. It is used as a time passes by piece, as we watch the months go by and the seasons change as Elizabeth contemplates on all that has gone on in the few weeks that have just passed. Charlotte's marriage and departure to Kent, Jane's visit to London, the Bingleys and Mr. Darcy having also left for London, and the militia to the north with the colourful Mr. Wickham, as the film describes it. I thought this next quote seemed quite appropriate to this next piece, and it's from the beginning of chapter 27. With no greater events than these in the Longbourn family, and otherwise diversified by little beyond the walks to Meryton, sometimes dirty and sometimes cold, did January and February pass away. March was to take Elizabeth to Hunsford. She had not at first thought seriously of going thither, but Charlotte, she soon found, was depending on the plan, and she gradually learned to consider it herself with greater pleasure as well as greater certainty. Absence had increased her desire of seeing Charlotte again, and weakened her disgust of Mr. Collins. There was novelty in the scheme, and as, with such a mother and such uncompanionable sisters, home could not be faultless, a little change was not unwelcome for its own sake. The journey would moreover give her a peep at Jane, and in short, as the time drew near, she would have been very sorry for any delay. Everything, however, went on smoothly, and was finally settled according to Charlotte's first sketch. Film, this next piece is called The Living Sculptures of Pemberley, which is heard when Lizzie and the gardeners are walking through Pemberley with the housekeeper. This is a very slow and emotion-filled piece, and I really feel it reflects Lizzie's thoughts when she first sees the image of Darcy at Pemberley, heard in chapter 43. Elizabeth walked on in quest of the only face whose features would be known to her. At last it arrested her, and she beheld a striking resemblance of Mr. Darcy, with such a smile over the face as she remembered to have sometimes seen when he looked at her. She stood several minutes before the picture in earnest contemplation, and returned to it again before they quitted the gallery. Mrs. Reynolds informed them that it had been taken in his father's lifetime. There was certainly at this moment, in Elizabeth's mind, a more gentle sensation towards the original than she had ever felt in the height of their acquaintance. The commendation bestowed on him by Mrs. Reynolds was of no trifling nature. What praise is more valuable than the praise of an intelligent servant? As a brother, a landlord, a master, she considered how many people's happiness were in his guardianship, how much of pleasure or pain it was in his power to bestow, how much of good or evil must be done by him. Every idea that had been brought forward by the housekeeper was favourable to his character, and she stood before the canvas on which he was represented, and fixed his eyes upon herself. She thought of his regard with a deeper sentiment of gratitude than it had ever raised before. She remembered its warmth, and softened its impropriety of expression. I'm next going to play Prelude No. 1 in C major by Bach. While I could not find any specific reference or mention or link with Jane Austen, it is very likely that she would have known of this piano piece as it was very popular and may even have played it herself. When I play it, it reminds me of a thoughtful Fanny Price, and this quote from chapter 10 came to mind. Fanny was again left to her solitude, and with no increase of pleasant feelings, for she was sorry almost all that she had seen and heard, astonished at Miss Bertram, and angry with Mr. Crawford. By taking a circuitous route and, as it appeared to her, very unreasonable direction to the knoll, they were soon beyond her eye, and for some minutes longer she remained without sight or sound of any companion. She seemed to have the little wood all to herself. She could almost have thought that Edmund and Miss Crawford had left it, but that it was impossible for Edmund to forget her so entirely. Adaptations, and the film made in 1996 of Emma starring Gwyneth Paltrow. This next piece, written by Rachel Portman, is titled Frank Churchill Arrives, and I think is echoed by this quote from chapter 23. The Frank Churchill so long talked of, so high in interest, was actually before her. He was presented to her, and she did not think too much had been said in his praise. He was a very good-looking young man. Height, air, address, all were unexceptionable, and his countenance had a great deal of spirit and liveliness of his father's. He looked quick and sensible. She felt immediately that she should like him, and there was a well-bred ease of manner and a readiness to talk, which convinced her that he came intending to be acquainted with her, and that acquainted they soon must be. piece for you today comes from the 1995 film of Sense and Sensibility, starring Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet. The piece is titled My Father's Favourite, and it is heard towards the beginning, played by a grieving Marianne, when the Dashwoods have just lost their father. This quote from chapter 1 shows just how keenly they all felt the loss. However, some were more open about their sorrow than others. The adaptation portrays this well, for Marianne continually plays this piece of music, their father's favourite, as she wallows in her grief. Eleanor, always the more sensible, does her best to persuade her sister to play something a little less mournful. Eleanor saw, with concern, the excess of her sister's sensibility, but by Mrs. Dashwood it was valued and cherished. They encouraged each other now in the violence of their affliction. The agony of grief which overpowered them at first was voluntarily renewed, was sought for, was created again and again. They gave themselves up wholly to their sorrow, seeking increase of wretchedness in every reflection that could afford it, and resolved against ever admitting consolation in future.